So I'm Rob Call, and I used to do a show called the Rob Call Bottom Up Show, and then I got COVID, and I stopped doing the show for about 10 months. And I decided that I was going to come back and do a show, but a different show. And I wanted to do a show that was based more on positive psychology, happiness, positive experiences. And so this is the first show. I don't even have a name for the show yet. Maybe it'll come out as we have this conversation. And as my first guest for my new show, I invited Darcia Narvaez. Did I say that right?
Yep.
And Darcia is one of the people in this world who I have some of the greatest respect for. I really believe she's an incredible innovator who has taken her ideas and explored them and exploded them. I got to know her through the positive psychology listserv, and I had a copy of her book sent to me, The Neurobiology of the Development of Human Morality, and it daunted me for several months before I actually cracked the cover and saw that it's just an incredible, brilliant book. And I don't think it alone. It won the award from the American Psychological Association as the William James Award for the best psychological book of the year. And Darcia is an incredibly productive psychologist, formerly a professor at University of Notre Dame, now emeritus. And so it's great to have you back on the show. This is the fourth or fifth time I think that you've been a guest on the show.
Yeah, great to be with you, Rob. Always good to have conversations with you. A very inquiring mind. Have a lot of good ideas too.
Thank you. So the idea that I'm trying to explore is looking at, I mean, there are a lot of people, other people doing it, but I think I have my own perspectives on it. And I want to get an idea about what makes people happy, what keeps people from being happy, how do they have positive experiences, what is important in the world. And I know that you have an enormous amount to say about it. So I got some notes about your work and some of your ideas. And I think one of the most important messages you're giving right now is we're stuck in a cycle and we need to break the cycle. What is the cycle and what do we need to break and how do we do that?
Right. Well, we forgot our wellness informed pathway, that evolution that forms part of our evolved kind of pathway here as a species. The evolution's about, flourishing essentially and making things more and more beautiful through mostly cooperation, but also some competition. And every animal has a pathway to wellness, and ours starts with meeting basic needs. That's pretty common for all animals. Meet the basic needs, foster a thriving individual, which fosters a thriving community. And for us, I can talk more about that pathway, but the cycle we got into is where we forgot basic needs, forgot how to provide them and what they are. And then what happens is we create people who are not very regulated in all sorts of levels, physiologically, psychically, relationally, morally. And those people, the children we foster from undercare because we don't provide what we call the evolved nest, those adults then aren't very well, they're not very compassionate, they're not very other oriented. And then they create a cycle of continuing the undercare of the young to create a competitive, detached society.
Now,
and so that's where we are. Yeah.
You say we forgot.
Yeah.
I think that's a very kind way of assessing the problem. It seems to me that we not only forgot it, but we systematically, intentionally embrace this approach.
Well,
not we, but a big part of the culture.
The dominant culture, yes, does it. It's sort of like experiment gone awry, not realizing what we're doing, inch by inch shifting over to a trauma-inducing pathway instead of a wellness-informed pathway. We've moved over because we forgot what our basic needs are. We try to minimize, oh, babies shouldn't need so much. Why should they bother parents so much? Let's just shut them up in their own room, in their own beds, and don't listen anymore. There we go. That's the trauma-inducing pathway. Once you start that child onto this trajectory of illness and ill-being and disconnection, you're going to have a person that doesn't operate very well in the species normal way.
Now,
and so we're pretty species atypical now.
so how does our current culture produce these disconnected, broken children?
Well, they forgot the evolved nest, which is what we see all over the world in nomadic foraging communities. They represent 99% of our history as a genus, 95% as a species. We've been around for 6 million years, 2 million years, 200,000, depending on what how you categorize people. And in that those communities, they provide a sensitive, cooperative nest for the young. So that means soothing birth, breastfeeding for several years, welcoming social climate, lots of caring and touch, and self-directed social play. Everybody plays, responsive relationships, lots of different caregivers. You're not coerced, you're not punished. It's nature immersed and nature connected. And then there's routine healing practices, because we are the animals who can make choices. We don't have to follow our instincts, and we often make mistakes. And so we have to rebalance ourselves, mend our relationships within ourselves, get rid of self-doubt, but mend our relationships with others and with the natural world. And this is a cycle of cooperative companionship that the elders, because they become wise elders, keep going. But what happened over the last, especially in the Western world, in the last millennia, especially the last few hundred years, and then worse than the last decades, people decided, no, babies don't need things. And what happens is the adults don't know what they're missing. They don't know what a thriving person looks like anymore. They think it's normal to have aggressive people, violent, dysregulated children, tantrums at age 2. That's not normal. It's not normal for babies to cry. It's not normal for kids to be aggressive and mean. It's not normal for adults to be self-centered and aggressive. That's all abnormal for our species. I mean, there's times and periods for certain behaviors, but it's not normal dispositionally what we think is normal now. So
now you mentioned foraging and what were the two kinds of peoples again?
Nomadic foragers.
Nomadic foragers. These are indigenous people, right? Generally.
Yes,
yeah.
Right. And many others. Nomadic foraging people are the 99%, but there are others, complex hunter-gatherers. They maintain a lot of these practices too. Chiefdoms, tribes, also, those are different layers of complexity. It's when we moved into city-states, when we moved into hierarchical, agricultural, monocultural societies, that the nest got less and less provided.
And that's when hierarchy started. When I spoke to Daniel Quinn, the author of Ishmael and the Beyond Civilization, he theorized that people, about 10,000 years ago, when people started dominating the land with agriculture and animals, with domestication of animals, they started having surpluses, which you've talked about. And that led to different classes of people. That led to police and soldiers and the people who told them what to do. And then the rest of the serfs, or whatever you would call them. And that led to the hierarchy that has really changed so much. And I think, from what I know of your work, you think it too, that hierarchy is a big part of what has changed that relationship, that shift from cooperative companionship to what?
Competitive detachment.
Okay.
But the hierarchy, it's the rigid hierarchy. It's this idea of linear progress too. That's part of the Western view, that we can't do anything else. This is the way it is. There's collateral damage. Yeah, so what? We're making progress. We're evolving, right? So this kind of mythic understanding of life. There's a recent book out by the late David Graeber and David Wengrow called The Dawn of Everything. And in there, they talk about the evidence now that's been uncovered that there were societies who were nomadic foragers and egalitarian, fiercely egalitarian as part of that experience. But at certain times of the year, they would go into hierarchical organizations to collect meat or fish. They'd go settle someplace and then they'd have some hierarchy. And then after they've collected food or whatever they were doing celebrations, they would go back to their egalitarian ways. So we do have a choice. We can move and shift between different kinds of structures. But our mythology tells us, oh, there's no other way. So I got to spank you to keep you in line because I'm the boss, or whoever is in charge thinks they can punish others. And remove, like Daniel Quinn says, keep the food from them. You must work to eat. Right? That's a big thing about what he points out. And we treat the rest of nature that way too. We're going to exterminate you because I don't like you in my house, spider. Instead of treating the natural world as partnerships. These are relationships with animals and plants who've been around much longer than our species. We're just kind of a young thing on the block, and we're now destroying everything because we've lost our way.
So you've got a relatively recent book out that you did with Four Arrows, Don Jacobs. Tell us a little bit about that and what its message is and how it ties in with our conversation.
Right. So we talk about the indigenous worldview. We call it the kinship worldview because it is about relationships and connection. This is part of indigenous psychology. The kind of natural way to be is you're connected to the earth. You feel connected, you know how to get along, you're placeful on the earth. And what's really critical then is to have know-how for getting along, as well as the attitude that you practice on a daily basis. And the indigenous worldview then is this understanding that comes from nestedness. It comes bottom up from experiencing the nest of nature, immersion and connection, and having your needs met and being relationally attuned to others. All your neurobiology is functioning well, so you can do all those things. And then it bubbles up into just the way of the world. This is the way it is. We're all connected. There's spirituality. We're all in this dynamic universe where we have responsibilities to make sure that we are acting properly and respectfully to keep everything in balance and harmony. That is the indigenous perspective. And in the book, we quote 28 different Native people, and then we have a discussion about each of the quotes. Each quote represents one of 28 precepts of the indigenous worldview. Four Arrows has been studying the indigenous worldview for a long time, has other books about it, and we picked 28 of the 40 things he's identified.
Sounds awesome. And the title of the book again?
Restoring the Kinship Worldview.
All right. So, you know, one of the things that got me into the whole world of positive psychology, which I got into back in the mid 80s, I think I gave my first workshop at a national conference about 1985, was I got into the idea of the heartwarming experience or feeling. And that kind of glow you feel. Parents will often feel it when they're watching children. You get it when you're listening to some. One study found that only about half the population actually experiences it, and that same study found that endorphins mediated it. Probably some oxytocin in there too, but
vagus nerve functioning. Yeah.
Vagus nerve functioning. Oh, well, we're going to talk a little bit about that. I want to hear more about that because that sounds very interesting. And I got into this idea that I basically made a relaxation tape, and I told people to think about a heartwarming experience feel the warmth in their heart, and then using autogenic imagery, let the warmth flow into their hands. And when I had people hooked up to the biofeedback equipment that I was working with at the time, monitoring their psychophysiology, I found that all their physiology went in the right direction if they thought about a heartwarming experience that they had. And that got me fascinated with that. And I started, and this was the early 80s, no internet. So I went to Index Medicus and Psych Abstracts. There was nothing on the heartwarming feeling. And so I started telling people who were taking the workshops I was giving to write down 3 heartwarming experiences. And the ones that they came up with were not always what I thought were heartwarming. They were positive experiences, though. So I kind of shifted my focus to positive experiences. And I came up with this theory that I presented at the National Positive Psychology Conference and the Canadian Positive Psychology Conference, both of which are peer-reviewed. The basic idea that positive experiences are the building blocks for our capacity for happiness, our capacity to face challenges, to love, to face adversity, and to cope with problems. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. Now,
And
it's going to matter how you're raised, what's positive to you.
Yeah, and I think your nest model fits in beautifully with this, because those are some of the core elements of experiences that you need to have. I mean, the nest is a collection of experiences, really, right?
Ongoing, daily, moment by moment experiences. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you don't have them, then you are missing core parts of what it is to be a strong, happy, loving, caring, connected person, really.
Yeah, it matters when your brain is under development, your brain and body shaping themselves based on experience in those first years. And that's when it is critical, so that you are resilient later. If you don't have the experiences when you're 10, you still have your body and brain is working well because of those early years.
Yeah, and so my conclusion from doing that original bit of thinking was that you want to build skills for having more, better, stronger, deeper positive experiences. But the way you just characterized it, that you need to build a nest where you're continuously having them. That really adds something, I think, essential to it. You're not going to have that happiness that you could have. And that's where we get into the fact that it's not just our genetics anymore, right?
That's right. It's epigenetics, but also plasticity. We are ready to be shaped by our experiences because we're born so immature. We're like fetuses of other animals till about 18 months of age. Our brains get, our big social brains are expecting to grow a lot after birth. And of course, they can't grow within the mother's womb. There's not enough room in the birth canal for that big head to come out. So the baby has to come out very young and expects the nest, expects all their needs to be met, just like in the womb, an external womb experience, a womb with a view, as Ashley Montagu called it. And not to be distressed. That would, that's not what happens usually in the womb. So all that, the nestedness, really critical in the first years, but it's actually important for all of us, all life long, to keep us in that mode of cooperation, of other orientedness, of feeling part of the earth. We need nestedness all the time, essentially. I mean, there are moments when we maybe don't have it, but once we've just gotten used to having it all the time, we create it where we go.
So we need to take a little break now just to identify what's going on here. And I'm not sure how to identify it because this is Rob Call. I have done radio for over 12 years now, but this is a new show that I haven't come up with a name or description for yet. But it's going to focus and is focusing on happiness, positive experiences, and how to use our strengths and the things that we have the potential to become better, stronger, happier people. My guest, the first guest for this new show is Darcia Narvaez. She has a website called evolvednest.org. She's got a new book out, Restoring the Kinship Worldview. I encountered her when she wrote a multiple award-winning book, The Neurobiology of the Development of Human Morality. And we're talking about this idea of the evolved nest, how it evolved and how it's affecting us, and how its absence has caused a lot of problems for a lot of people. So what I want to make sure we cover is you've got most of humanity have not been raised in an evolved nest. They've been deprived.
Well, now, before it used to be most people were raised in the evolved nest. It's the Western dominant globalization that's kind of messed everything up, colonization.
I meant most of living humanity. No, totally.
Now, yeah.
As you said, if you look in different ways, humans have been around for up to 60 million years, but the people who are alive today, most of them have not been raised in an evolved nest.
Well, I should say, when I present the evolved nest to academic conferences, the South Americans, South Asians, Africans go, oh yeah, we know. It's the Westerners, it's the North Americans and the Europeans go, what? I don't have to touch my child. What? Breastfeeding? Well, it's not important.
So you don't feel it's as much of a problem for the South Americans and Africans and Asians?
Well, not traditionally, but capitalization, globalization is wrecking countries everywhere. It's wrecking communities because they say, oh, we have to make everyone wealthy economically. And when they do that, they come in and they take things over that were working just fine. And they create social and ecological poverty. They interrupt the patterns that have been there for centuries and millennia, perhaps, just like they did when they came to the North America.
Well, when I think of European explorers, I think of them as rapists and slavers and cultural destroyers who went and intentionally wiped out and destroyed cultures and even total populations. I mean, Columbus, his first stop ended up destroying all the people on that island.
Yeah, there's a blindness to it, right? So when you're raised outside the nest, you don't know what you're doing. You are oriented to domination, typically, or submission, or both. And you have a big gap in your heart. You've been raised to be survival oriented. Your self-protection survival systems kick in, right? And you're dysregulated. And all you can do is try to find something to feel okay about. And it can be what's been happening in the last few hundred years is being extraction or consumer oriented, taking and destroying because you don't feel well. And right, and the system of indebtedness and slavery and all that was all intertwined with this. So Cortez, for example, he was in debt, and so they were all these conquistadores, and I have them in my heritage. As a Puerto Rican, I have all the mix of everything around the world, almost. And they were in debt, and they're trying to, make sure their families don't go into slavery because they didn't pay their debts. So it's all just this crazy system that got set up in the last millennia.
Well, you mentioned heart, and you talk about heart in a number of different ways. You talk about it with children. You talk about it with how our hearts are affected. So talk some more about heart.
Yeah. So let me say what happens when you don't nest a baby is they have to enhance their survival systems, and the things that are supposed to be growing when you're nested is this social emotional intelligence and your sense of connectedness. And you can see this in the anthropological ethnography reports of pre-conquest cultures. They're just so embodied and together and happy, and they enhance one another's well-being. That's just what you do because it's so fun to be alive. And what's critical to being a human being, and traditionally all over the world, is to be heart-minded, to think with your heart. You're always connected, your connectedness, your oneness, always there to emphasize that. What we do in the Western world is we've undermined that. We distress babies and young children. We punish them. That's something Europeans have thought for hundreds of years was important to do, because they had this idea of original sin in babies and whatever else other cultural things happened to undermine their understanding of child development. You have to punish them, and then they'll be obedient, and then they'll be good, and they'll be an autonomous, responsible, reasoning person. Completely opposite of what any indigenous person would say. And you're actually undermining their heartness, their heart-mindedness, because then when we send them to school, then they don't have a heart. They've got survival systems, and then you train their head, and then you tell them this is the information you need to know to be a good person. And so they learn, and we have all these graduates who know a lot of stuff, and they're oriented to, being on top or competing, but they don't have their heart. Their heart mind has not been developed. Their intuitions are for self, are for me and mine. They're not for us, for oneness, for connection.
Yeah. So how do we fix that? How do we've got all these billions of people like this. Can they be helped? Can we make them so that they have more heart-mindedness?
Well, it takes, when I talk about it, I talk about it at the individual level and then at the greater level. The individual level, if you become aware of this deficit, you need to start with self-calming, because we are so anxious. In the United States, we got all these anxious and depressed people, right? Their whole systems are all never well regulated. So you have to learn to self-calm.
How do you become aware of this absence?
Well, you got to listen and follow the little tweaks in your little bird speaking in your ear that something's not right. What could it be? Now, unfortunately, the tempting thing to do is to blame those people. That's what a dysregulated person is going to do. Oh, it's those green people. They did it. Let's go out there and get rid of them. And that's the temptation, right? Because it's going to take some pain to realize there's something wrong in you. And
are there cues that people can look for, or that would help them to recognize that?
Well, I think if you're unhappy all the time to look around and find people who aren't unhappy all the time. What are they doing? Now, you don't want to go to a rally with, and find enthusiasm around, military weaponry that's going to, get you all excited to feel part of a group. If you're blaming others, that's a sign there's something off. Find out what it is in you that person is triggering in you. That's a signal, right? So that's a healing spot for you to learn something and to realize that life's about learning. Everything you're doing, every time you get upset, it's a learning opportunity. So then take it in and examine and be some reflective. Now, in the indigenous psychology approach, you don't sit down with a therapist and talk through things. You go and you go into the natural world and you sit, contemplate. You go on a vision quest. You go fasting, and you spend some time outside and wait for signals for where you need to go next, and wait for a vision. And you're confident because you understand that the universe is on your side, essentially. And talking doesn't always get there. It's again in this headspace, which gets us all kind of confused sometimes, because we think that's all there is about a human being, but that's very little, and it's a dangerous place to hang out because you think you know everything. That's the left brain, that ego consciousness that likes to take over.
Now you talk about left and right brain stuff.
Yeah. Your right brain is who you are, essentially. Your right hemisphere is growing more rapidly in early life. It's the seat of self-regulation at that time, and your social emotional intelligence development, your empathy, your flexible attunement to others, And when you unnest kids and you leave them alone to cry, you leave them alone to sleep, you train them to do this or that, to sleep alone, to eat on the schedule, whatever it is, when they're under age 5 or 6, then you're undermining that right hemisphere development. When you put kids in school doing worksheets and sitting in desks and rigid rules about who they are as a kid, they should be playing through until they're 12, 13. Then they can sit down and do stuff, whatever their heart desires, because their heart will be better trained and cultivated. So the right brain is the place where we collect all our experiences. The left brain takes those experiences and makes some generalizations from it, and then kind of checks back with a well-functioning brain. They work together. In a poorly functioning brain, that right brain doesn't have a lot of experiences to go on because the child's been left in a crib by themselves or with an iPad or, punished or
Screens.
traumatized. And so they have the wrong kinds of information or very little to go on. And the left brain will just pick something out of the blue, out of the air. It thinks it knows everything. So it's going to be susceptible to authoritarian lines of thought of blaming those other people because I feel uncomfortable. It's them that made me feel uncomfortable, right? And so the left brain starts to think it knows everything when the brain is not integrated.
So are you kind of suggesting that people who are authoritarian, the tiny fraction who are the I'm going to tell you what to do, or the 99% who say I want somebody to tell me what to do, are authoritarian persons people with left brain dominance then?
Yeah, and the survival systems have gotten overactivated. They're threat reactive, and so they don't get to their heart connection, their heart mindedness. They're not aware of their connection and oneness, right? That's what heart centeredness is about. And
More on heart centeredness. Keep going.
well, I heard someone say, "Oh, I love Trump because he's heart centered." It's like, what? He's not heart-oriented at all. He has no sense, or at least doesn't convey any sense of oneness with everyone and everything, and that it takes humility. You don't know everything, but you're here, and you're here as a learner, as a member of the community. Then all these other animals and plants know more than us, right? So you should be humble and learn from them. And all these other people have gifts to share. And so the heart-mindedness is that egalitarian sense of flowing dynamism. And it's the authoritarian that can't flow. They have a rigid mindset because their survival systems have kicked into place. They're acting like chimpanzees more than humans. We evolved away from chimpanzees. We evolved to be egalitarian. That's how we got our big social brains. We had cooperative child raising that builds a big social brain that can take the perspective of others, that learns to be mind-minded, to be cooperative in this very flowing way that we see in our nested communities. And that's where, but we forgot, again, we think we're chimpanzee-like, right? So male dominance and aggression and violence, yes. And that's that survival-oriented ego that's talking to us.
Okay, so let's keep going. Now, I interrupted you when I asked you about how do you help people who have been detached from the nest, the billions of people, and most Americans, of course. How do you help them to recover from that loss? You mentioned learning to self-calm. So you want to start there?
Yeah, self-calming. So that would be belly breathing. That's what I did with my students. Other forms of meditation. Everyone has to kind of find their own way to calm down, going on meditative walks, and learning to let go of the feelings or thoughts that flow through your head. As the meditation Buddhists recommend, think about your thought or feeling on a boat, just flowing on a river, going by, and you can say hello, and then it goes. But once you start thinking about it and grabbing onto it for more than, is it 15 seconds, you might start to obsess about it, and it's hard to let go. So practicing those kinds of things, loving yourself, your body, if you were traumatized somehow, You have to learn to get back into your body because you've learned to dissociate and not be here in your body. So learn how to, be kind to yourself, do things that are pleasurable, and get back into, ideally you have relationships that are helping you, a friend that will help you be in yourself, with affectionate cuddling and such. Being out in the natural world is one of the best places. If you can go into a woodland, a place where you can lie on the ground, lean against the tree, and that energy will flow into you, and feel the earth loving you. This is part of the universe. You are part of the universe, right? And remember that. So you have to get all those crazy little tapes out of your head that, no, it's dirty out there, or, oh, I'm superior, I'm a human being and I should be thinking this through. No, you're a body, you're embodied here now. Enjoy being here. Find ways to find the joy.
And you talk about connecting with the energy of nature, and we are so far from that. There was one group, one tribe, the Sonoy. You know about the Sonoy, right? The Sonoy, they were so connected to nature that it was deeply, I don't even know how to describe it, except that they were able to relate to the trees and the plants in such a different way that it's hard for us to even imagine. But there's a quantum level of difference between our disconnectedness from nature and what we could be, and what the most connected indigenous people are. It's just huge. And you say it, you talk about it, but it's massive. It's illuminating. I'm at a loss for words, but it's a big deal. Now, I want to get back now.
Can I say something first?
Of course.
About that? So we did an experiment a few years ago that was published with undergraduates, because we were trying to get them back to what we called ecological attachment, nature connection. And we, in the experimental group, after they read motivating pieces about how important it is to be connected to nature, they then selected and took a pretest. Then they selected 21 things to do out of about 40, and took them along in an envelope. And every day for the next 3 weeks, they picked one out of the envelope to do during that day. Like, pay attention to the clouds today. Acknowledge the trees you walk by today, because they're on campus. And then they came back for a post-test. And we were able to increase their ecological attachment. So these little nudges, to get back in your body, get back here, notice where you are, pay attention to your senses, and connect. You are here. And you can go to ecoattachment.dance. And there's 28 of these activities people can do one a day.
I want to check that out. Awesome. So when I mentioned the idea of heartwarming, I threw in a couple aspects. You mentioned the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is like getting a lot of attention. I think there was even a New York Times article about it recently. What's the deal with the vagus nerve?
It's becoming easier to study. I have a graduate student who's becoming an expert in studying it. So we have a couple of publications already out regarding it. So in one of them, I'll just say, we looked at the mothers in our longitudinal sample. We asked them about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. We also asked them about their evolved nest experience as children. And then we tested their vagus nerve function, which is related to self-calming, self-regulation. And the ACEs had a negative effect on the vagus nerve, but the evolved nest had a buffering effect on those negative effects.
Well, maybe we should take a step back and describe what the functions of the vagus nerve are.
Yeah, so the vagus nerve is the 10th cranial nerve. It innervates all the major systems of the body. So that means the heart, the lungs, the gut. And it's needs to be well established, and that's what the nest does. But for children who are undercared for, I use that term for unnestedness. If they're undercared for, it's likely their vagus nerve isn't going to be well established. So then they can have irritable bowel, gut problems, respiratory problems, heart problems, brain seizures, and it also affects your social capacities. So if it's not well established, then you have a hard time with intimacy, and you have a hard time calming yourself down because things just get out of whack, along with other mechanisms, systems in the body that are related to the stress response.
Wow. Now, in your book, the development of the neurobiological development of human morality, you got like 150 pages of references to studies on the different neurobiological connections and how they all are interwoven with the nest and how they're all developed. So the vagus nerve is just one of many, right?
Right.
How does the vagus nerve tie in with happiness and having positive experiences, for example?
Well, it's related to, it links the gut and the brain-gut axis, or the gut-brain axis. And the microbiome matters. It affects your moods, right? So if you eat too much junk food and have the wrong kind of bacteria growing in your gut, you're not going to be as happy, for example. It also is related to then how the heart functions. There's always these communications, and most of the, it calms you down. So when you learn belly breathing well, it's then affecting your lung function, your heart function, your gut function, and then it's relating to your brain and how you're thinking and feeling. Just speaking.
What about that heartwarming feeling, that glow, or the chills up the back of the neck? What do you know about those?
I don't know specifically what the physiology of that is, but I imagine it's related to the vagus nerve. I was just speaking to a friend whose wife had throat surgery, and afterwards the surgeon apologized for nicking the vagus nerve near the throat. And ever after, she was depressed and anxious.
Wow.
Yeah.
And half the population do not feel those glows. I wonder whether that's tied in with that.
I'm sorry, you froze. You froze.
Half the population, according to this one study, don't feel chills up the back of their neck or thrills or anything when they're hearing music or watching or reading a passage about a heart-touching story or something like that. Half the population. I wonder, you got any ideas about where that comes from?
Well, I wonder if that's also the peak experience, the lack of peak experiences, which Maslow noticed a lot of I can't remember what percentage he said didn't have peak experiences, that sense of oneness, right? So it's probably, there's a relationship there.
All right, so sense of oneness. Now, that's a little different than heart connectedness, right?
Yeah.
How's it different?
Well, I can speculate about it. So the heart connectedness, the way I see that is you kind of feel it, right? You feel that heartwarming connection when you see something, a child, a baby, your relative, you feel that. And some people don't get, like you said, don't have that feeling. The sense of oneness can be kind of more holistic, comes from your head down. So I find it more head, but glowing, I guess, the glowing of the head and the heart.
You know, I had an exchange. I've been into this whole idea of heartwarming for a long time, since the early 80s. So, wow, it's 40 years.
Yeah, you need it.
Yeah. And at one point I felt guilty because I would see something horrible, like some Nazi atrocity, and I would have the same kind of a glow.
Oh, are you sure it wasn't a stab?
Well, it was the same kind of feeling, and I was guilty. I was feeling guilty. What's wrong with me?
Hmm.
But then I realized it's empathy,
Yeah.
and that's what I was feeling. I was feeling compassion and empathy for those people, and that's what gave that to me. So
Yeah, I can't watch like wrestling worldwide, whatever it is, wrestling bouts or people getting slugged or what. I always have to cover my eyes because I can feel it. Ah,
there are lots of reasons not to be able to watch WW, whatever that is, Worldwide Wrestling. Yeah, yeah, but so empathy is an important thing, and I that goes back way before humans too. I mean, uh, it goes back to the earliest lactating mammals, really.
yeah, I
So
don't know how far back it goes, but I know, do you know the famous rat experiment, right?
what's that?
Where this is from University of Chicago, Jean Desity. They had a rat in a cage. The rat used to seeing this tube in the cage, and then they put one of the rats, another rat in that tube with a door on it, and the rat in the tube was very distressed, and the free rat worked and worked to get that door open. It was really hard, but they did that every time the other rat was caught. And even when there were two tubes and one had chocolate chips in it, which rats love, apparently, they would go and open the tube, usually first, or if they open the chocolate chips first, they would go and open the other one to let the rat out and share the chocolate chips with them. So they saw this as a sign of empathy.
Yeah, yeah, it goes back. I think is it Franz de Waal? With,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I think you've done some work with him, right?
Yes, he's spoken at a conference I've had. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've been
Yeah.
at one of his. Yeah.
I've interviewed him a couple of times, and he told me that empathy started about 200 million years ago. And yet, empathy is one of the things that's missing from narcissists and psychopaths.
Yeah.
So
Well, actually, the sociopath would have some empathy because they know how to trick the other person. They
that's,
know how to say the right thing that's going to lure them into their, the con artist is really good at that.
but is that empathy or just an intellectual understanding?
Yeah, so there's two kinds of empathy. So there's perspective taking kind, the cognitive kind, and then there's the emotional empathy.
Yeah.
So we find that with a nest, it's the unnestedness can create empathy too, because you've been hurt and traumatized and you have a sense of feeling sorry for others, right? But it's the cognitive empathy, the ability to take the perspective of someone else, that's a part of being nested.
Huh.
At
Okay.
least that's related in the studies we've done.
So I just want to do another show idea. It's kind of late to do it, but I'm Rob Cole, and I'm doing a new show about positive psychology and happiness and positive experiences. And my first guest for this new show is Darcia Narvaez, who has the website, theevolvednest.org, and she's got a new book out, which I have on another page. Yeah. Restoring the Kinship Worldview. So I wanted to kind of dig a little bit more with you into my ideas about the anatomy of positive experience. And so I broke it down into you want to be before it, you want to be ready, and that involves being able to relax and being able to be in good shape and healthy. And I think that's another thing our modern culture has taken away from a lot of people is they're not healthy anymore. And they eat unhealthy food and they sit around all day. And then, but the other thing is to also be prepared and to know how to have positive experiences. And then once you have them, to make them stronger and deeper. Now, is there an angle of that you can cover from looking at the evolved nest, the idea that once you're having a positive experience, how can you make it better?
Well, let me step back for a second and say it really matters what you immerse yourself into, right? Well, in the United States, we immerse people in violent media, violent, aggressive kind of contexts and controlling and coercive contexts. All that's going to undermine your ability to be calm and to be centered in your heart, right? So it really matters where you, so that's grabbing our attention all the time, buy this, buy that, you're
And I
never
would imagine
satisfied.
it also prevents you from noticing opportunities for positive experiences is really important. And if your attention has been trained to focus on that kind of energy, you're going to miss the other stuff.
That's right. And if you've been under nested, under cared for, you're going to be more oriented to negative stuff because you feel threatened, easily threatened, threat reactivity, right? So the negative stuff's going to grab your attention and keep you from putting your attention where you'd like it to be if you want to have a happy life, a centered life. So it really matters there. The know-how, then I think people also need to know what thriving looks like. We don't really know that anymore. I talk about that in my recent work. We look at the nested people, especially the San Bushmen. We have their genes. They are the ancestors of all of us in Southern Africa. And because they've been around for 150,000, 200,000 years at least, they have quiet minds, inner happiness, a childlike glee. It's all right to be like a child, right? If it's gleeful and non-hostile humor and being silly, they're fully alive and they have a sense of honesty and authenticity. They're open. They have outstanding memory and habit building capacities. They have know-how for getting along on the earth where they are and feel ecologically attached and connected to spirit, the non-manifest. And in relationship, they love to be with other people and they enhance the well-being of others. They listen and forgive and love. They're generous. All these things. All these things I think we forgot, again, because we don't have role models to show us what it looks like to thrive. And so if you're going to put your attention into thriving, you got to know what the aim is. And it's relational. It's relational.
So, wow. Because really what you're saying is this disconnected, detached way of growing up really sets you up to not see so much of what is good and what is potentially able to give you positive experiences and happiness, really. It blinds you.
That's right.
Wow. So how do people reverse that? I mean, you've talked a little bit about it. Keep going.
Yeah, so the self-calming, that's first. We get back into being able to be present, emotionally present, cognitively present, so that you're not distracted by resentment or, oh no, that might happen, anxiety. And then what I did with my students is we learned to be in the moment through folk song games. There's other things you can do, but this grows the right hemisphere when you have to be in the moment with another person. So learning to dance, learning to do art together, learning to, be silly together, play. I always recommend playing with a young child. They will, run you around, you will wrestle and all this stuff. Be present with them and they will grow your brain. But we learn folk song games because I used to be a music teacher. And so that's like hunting we will go, hunting we will go. We'll catch a little fox and put him in a box and then we'll let him go. And you keep making the big circle bigger and bigger. And what you're required to do is you have to touch people. You have to look them in the eye. You have to sing. And that's helping the vagus nerve. So humming and singing helps the vagus nerve grow. And then you're moving your body and you're enjoying yourself and you forget where you are and you're in the moment, right?
Well, in developing my anatomy of positive experience and talking about how do you make a positive experience stronger, you just described exactly what I say, which is add senses to it, connect with people, touch people, sing, hum, jump around. smile. And then when it comes to smiling, there are all these different kinds of smiles. I've learned more from my kids and my grandkids about smiling, the way to smile off the face. You can kids smile with their hands, they smile with their butts. I just discovered, I have a 2-year-old granddaughter. She smiles by picking up her foot.
That's great.
And it's simple stuff, but it's hard. It's really hard for people who didn't have that, who were really deprived, and who were made. And you've really just made me realize that these people, so many of us, most of us, were made blind. We were made blind to so many of the gifts and treasures that we have ready for us to embrace, that are there, but we don't have a way to know that they're there, because we're looking for the buzz. We're looking for the hard stimulation. We're looking for the excitement. And it's a different kind, which makes me think, again, with my grandkids, the screen stuff is really dangerous. Because
Right.
that kind of stimulation is so different than the soft energies of nature, for example.
Mm-hmm.
It
And
really,
it's interactive more so than the screen. Screen gives you the illusion of interaction.
so what do you do to connect to nature on a daily basis?
I'll go out in the garden and I'll talk to the trees, or I'll sing. The land here gave me a song to sing to it. So I do that. And I honor the 4 directions, actually the 6 directions every day. Sometimes that's singing, sometimes it's poetry, sometimes it's just acknowledging the energy of the different spirit animals that guide me.
And what are the 6 directions?
So east, south, west, north, the earth, and then the heavens.
All right. I'm Rob Call. My new show is about happiness and positive experiences, positive psychology. My guest for this show has been the amazing and extraordinary Darcia Narvaez. Darcia, thanks so much for doing it again.
You're very welcome. Great to be with you, Rob. Good luck.
All right. So, all right. I'm not sure how to stop the recording on this anymore. It's been so long since I did it. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. And
You're welcome.
I would love to keep in touch with you more.
Love it. Yeah.
Yeah, great. All right. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
All right. Take care.